Redistricting ruling, the state's highest court deciding that the current district maps gotta go. Hear from a redistricting expert on the next steps in the complicated process. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. New York's redistricting process seeing a new development as the State Court of Appeals ruling now the current district lines must be redrawn yet again. The court making that determination after the Independent Redistricting Commission failed to agree on one set of maps. Republicans argue that last year's maps should stay in place until the end of the decade when the next census is released. But the court sided with Democrats who sued, who argued that the maps drawn last year were always meant to be temporary. Joining us now to give additional insight into this redistricting decision, Susan Lerner, the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. Susan, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
For those of us not like you and me who follow this stuff because we just enjoy politics and following the machinations of it all, give a little bit of a history lesson. Initially, why were they redrawing these lines in the first place? Was this kind of an order from the state? With the census, you have to sort of recalibrate?
Yes. Every 10 years, when the census figures come down, the political boundary lines are redrawn across the country for every jurisdiction, large and small. Congressional districts, state legislative districts, city councils, county legislatures, because the population has shifted. People move, new people move in, folks change houses. And so the district lines are redrawn to reflect the changes in the population that the census has picked up.
Now, it seemed like a good plan. You put together this commission, you put, I don't know if it was actually, was it equal Republican and Democrat? It was pretty close if it wasn't. And you let them just,
it's even numbers.
Yeah, you got equal numbers, come up with a map you can both agree on. What could go wrong? Well, it seems like everything went wrong, right?
Unfortunately, we felt from the beginning that because the commission isn't really independent, the commissioners are appointed by the legislative leaders from both political parties. And technically, there are two members who are not registered in a political party, but practically speaking, what's happened is one of the unaffiliated leans to the Republican Party, one leans to the Democratic Party. So this 10-person commission splits down the middle and is very politically driven and controlled by the legislature. Instead of the legislature drawing the lines directly, they attempt to draw the lines indirectly through the commission.
And just so people understand, I'll make up a town so we don't get political. If there's a place called Susanville that was 90% Democrat, the Democrat might say, oh, we want to include Susanville in that district, all of it. And the Republican might say, well, wait a second, that's gonna put your thumb on the scale, right? Was that the issue trying to draw these? Each side was trying to push it their way for their candidates?
That's exactly what happens. Each side wants to draw a map that advantages their political party. It's a process called gerrymandering, where basically the politicians attempt to choose their voters instead of letting the voters choose their politicians. But you know, in Syracuse, there's a much better way to do it, which is a citizen-led redistricting commission made up of everyday Syracusans, 15 of them, who got together, studied the changes in the city, and drew a fair map to give every voter an equal chance to elect a representative of their choosing.
So jumping ahead to what happened this last election cycle or last year, they couldn't agree, the commission, so what, did a court-appointed person kind of drew something up?
They couldn't agree. Then the legislature stepped in and said, well, there's a hole in the Constitution. It doesn't tell us what to do when the commission disagrees. We're going to draw a map. Some parts of that map were gerrymandered for Democratic advantage. The Republicans sued. There was a trial in Bath, New York, and a master was appointed who drew the maps that we all voted under in 2022 for the Senate, state Senate, and for the congressional districts.
And that map, however it was drawn, it seems like Republicans are able to flip a few seats, and that leads to another lawsuit from Democrats saying, you know, we're not going to stick with that map. We need to go back to square one, right? That's what they're asking the courts to do here?
That's exactly right. I mean, and really what people don't understand is that the master's map was a pretty fair map, And most of the districts that the Republicans flipped actually were what we call plus Biden districts. They the voters there had indicated that they were friendly to Democratic candidates. So the question then arises: is it the maps or is it the campaigns?
Right. But so now the recent ruling, they're going to have to go back. The Democrats had a court rule in their favor. They got to go back, and is it back to the commission's lap now? They've got to reappoint some people and redo this whole thing. Are we back to square one?
We're back. Well, we're back to square two, because the commission was reconstituted to allegedly redraw assembly maps in yet another litigation. And the commission there basically adopted the existing assembly maps that the legislature had drawn. So we do have a full 10-person commission, and they've been waiting to see what the court tells them to do. And the court says, okay, you failed the first time. You drew one set of maps, which the legislature rejected, which the legislature can do. So now we're at stage two. Go back and finalize, try again, come up with a map you can agree on, send that to the legislature. The legislature then gets to vote up or down on that map. And that whatever the legislature adopts, if they do adopt something, goes to the governor for her signature. And we would have entirely new districts, assuming the commission can agree again. We don't know whether they will or not.
Yeah, we're down to the last minute. I've been doing this about 40 years. It seems like when I got into this business as a journalist, people seem to work together better. I feel like now one side or the other could come out with a resolution saying chocolate tastes good, and there'd be an anti-chocolate committee formed the next day. Does it feel that way sometimes from your perspective on Albany, that they just will not get along?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is a Washington-style split, which is really unfortunate. It's basically redistricting has turned into a slugfest between the two political parties, and we, the voters, are trapped in the middle, getting beat up and confused about when our elections are going to be and what districts we're going to vote in. It's not helping the voters. And I also don't think it helps the political parties.
No, not at all. Last 20 seconds. They're on the clock, right? They can't take 9 months to figure out these maps now, where we are now, right? They got to get going.
Yeah, the court said that the commission has to take its action and send maps by February 28th. But that's kind of late in our calendar. And some of us are questioning whether we might be looking at an August primary for Congress yet again.
Oh, boy. All right. Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause. Have wonderful holidays, and I'm sure, knowing our lawmakers, you and I will be talking again very soon.
I'm sure. Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to you. This time of year, school-age kids are thinking about the holidays, but school administrators are likely planning ahead for the new year. When we come back, we'll speak with a member of the State School Boards Association on the biggest items from this past year and what they're looking forward to next year. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Bray in Albany. As this year is coming to an end, state officials are already looking ahead to the start of the 2024 academic year. The State Board of Regents releasing its budget priorities for next year. The board requesting $1.6 billion in state aid. It's about $1 billion less than last year when the state was fully funding foundation aid. Foundation aid is meant to provide more resources to schools with high-need students. Budget priorities will include supporting students with disabilities after they graduate and establishing a statewide teacher recruitment pipeline to address the staffing shortages. To give us additional insight on some of the biggest issues from the past year of education as we head into the new one, David Albert, he's the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for the State School Boards Association. David, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
For those who have no idea who you are, what the School Board Association is, what you represent, just as the name implies, school boards around the state?
Absolutely. So there are around 700 or so school districts and BOCES throughout the state. Most of those are elected. Those members are elected by their communities, and we represent those boards. We train them on how to oversee their school districts. We provide information to keep them current on what's happening in education, and we also advocate on behalf of schools with the legislature.
Let's talk a little bit about the year 2023. One of the big things that got our headlines in the news business was regents, changes with the regents, whether or not it's going to be required, whether there'll be certificates given out versus a regent's diploma. Talk a little bit about that. Where do they stand on all of that in the state?
Sure. So this is a work in progress, and this is really one of the biggest things happening in public education today. The regents appointed a blue ribbon commission to take a look at what should students know when they graduate from high school, and how has that changed, over the last decades. And if you remember, like I do, back in the 90s, there was a big push to have every student pass regents exams in order to graduate. Today, we take a look at what do students need to know when they graduate to go out into the workforce? We know that more than a third of students who graduate from high school actually go straight into the workforce, or they go into workforce development programs. So the regents are taking a look at what are the things that every student should know today in order to be ready to go out there and work. And so they're looking at requirements such as financial literacy and career and technical education, enhancing those programs, and finding other ways for students to demonstrate proficiency in a particular area than maybe just taking one exam. So for example, if you're studying computers, rather than passing an exit exam on computer science, maybe you build a website, or maybe you program an algorithm to show that you are fluent and mastered that subject matter. So these are the conversations that the regents are having, and they're going to affect public school students across the state, but it's not something that's going to happen right away. It's a process, and I'd say probably a couple years out before any of these changes take effect. What we see right now are simply recommendations to the regents for them to review and consider. There'll be many opportunities for the public and others to weigh in on this. So right now it's a work in progress, but certainly very big work being done by the regents.
Is one of the enemies of this misinformation, what I mean is if you see a headline in the paper says, state may do away with regents requirements, anybody over 40 or 50, your reflex is to think, oh, here they go. We're going to dumb things down, make it easier for the kids to graduate because they're not smart enough to pass a regents test. That's not what this is what you're saying. It's kind of changing the way we're educating kids so they're better prepared.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, certainly regents exams have been around for a while, and I don't necessarily see those exams going away. But there are other ways to prove that you are proficient in a particular subject matter. And I think what this is about really is taking a look at two things. Number one, how has the world changed? Back in the 90s, no one could have envisioned that we would have digital marketing specialists or artificial intelligence, right? I mean, those were things that we just wouldn't be preparing students for. But today the world is very different. So we're looking at what exactly is it that a student needs to know to really demonstrate that they're ready to go out into either the career world or the college world. And then the second thing is really, does one exam really determine whether or not you have mastered a subject matter? And so the regents are taking a look at, as I said earlier, maybe project-based types of learning or things of that nature, assessments that are developed by the school district. So really, it's really about making sure that the standards and what students are learning align with the world today and prepare students to go out into the workforce, and don't really just rely too heavily on one particular exam.
It's also, isn't it, keeping up with the times of what the colleges, administrators or admissions people are looking at? When I got out of high school in class of 81 at LaSalle in Troy, New York, it was, here's my GPA, here's my SAT score. That's kind of what they looked at, maybe extracurriculars a little bit. That's changed a lot in 40 years, hasn't it, where they're looking at a broader definition of what a student is and what they can bring to your school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're going to see more of a focus on projects and things that students have done as they go into college. Here's a specific project that I worked on. I think, collaboration is a key thing that employers look for. And so evidence that students have worked in teams. So I think you're going to see more of these kinds of things happening in high schools to prepare students not just for college, but for the workforce.
Let's jump subjects a little bit. Putting aside the debate we could easily have for an hour about whether kids were kept home too long during COVID, that ship sailed. We're post-COVID now. How are the kids doing in terms of catching up? I know that had to be an issue in schools, and school boards must have been trying to navigate those waters as well.
Yeah, and obviously there was certainly some learning gaps that occurred during COVID. I mean, students were home for a great deal of time as opposed to being in the classroom, and remote learning really just isn't as effective as in-person classroom learning. So we know that the federal government and the state government here in New York have allocated, a great deal of money to help schools overcome some of those challenges. And school boards have been creating programs for students, like summer school programs or after school enrichment programs. And these programs are really designed to bring students back up to where they need to be. Schools have been investing in tutoring programs as well. These are all very labor intensive. We also are in kind of a situation where there's a shortage of teachers in certain areas, so it hasn't made things easier. But suffice it to say that schools are focusing on this. It's not going to happen overnight. Education doesn't happen instantaneously. So it's really, going to happen over time. And hopefully we'll continue to see, some type of improvements in proficiency in math and English language arts as these programs continue to run.
Last minute, so it's an unfair question to throw at you because it's more complicated, but with AI, this is, I don't want to say dangerous territory, but it is a little bit for teachers in terms of a kid now can just say to a computer, give me 600 words on, whatever, and the War of 1812, and the thing spits it out in 2 seconds. Is this becoming difficult for teachers to navigate and to make sure the kid's doing the work?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, I guess, responses. I mean, one is that I think in its rudimentary phase, we were kind of early into language models like ChatGPT, et cetera, and it's not that difficult to pick up that something has been written by artificial intelligence. But as it gets more sophisticated, it's going to be more of a challenge. There are applications out there that can detect whether something has been written by AI. So schools, may end up having to leverage that. It's really, kind of the Wild West in many ways, because I don't know that anybody anticipated that AI would come as far as it has so quickly. And even though some of those large language models may still be relatively rudimentary, they're going to catch up, and they're going to catch up fast. So schools have to be prepared for it. And I think one of the things we're doing is advising schools to start thinking about adopting policies on artificial intelligence in terms of how they'll be used in curriculum, working with teachers, and really starting to anticipate how is this going to change education, because I could envision a day when students are learning how to write good prompts for artificial intelligence, and that could become part of education. So we really have to start thinking about it, because AI is a game changer.
All right, David Albert from the State School Board Association. I know you're real because we booked you. You're not a computer, so thank you for coming on.
That's true. Thank you, John.
We appreciate it. While a federal ruling means that New York can enforce its concealed carry law, when we come back, we'll break down the details of the ruling and where state gun owners can and can't carry those firearms. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. A federal court says that New York State can enforce much of its concealed carry law that went into effect last year, but not all of it. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine has a story.
In a 261-page document, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit said pending decisions in lower courts, concealed carry can continue to be banned in sensitive places. However, an exception was made for places of worship. Republican Assemblyman Robert Smullen thinks this is a big win.
What if you're a rabbi running a synagogue right now? Wouldn't you like to be able to have the idea that your worshipers, the people that are citizens in your community, could actually defend themselves in their house of worship?
New York's Attorney General released a statement saying, quote, the decision also allows all private property owners, including owners of places of worship, to prohibit firearms on their property, including through the postage of signs. The requirements for an in-person interview, character references, and 16 hours of training are still in effect. James added the requirement to demonstrate good moral character and the disclosure of household and family members on a permit application will also stay in place. However, the court did block the requirement for applicants to provide a list of their social media accounts, something Smullen is happy about.
The idea that we're going to take people's social media accounts, a free speech, a First Amendment platform, into account when we consider something so important as a Second Amendment right, that was absolutely ludicrous.
The legal battle isn't over yet.
We also know that there will be an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court no matter what.
Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, we are continuing our look back at some of the biggest legislation to impact the state this year, with the goal of getting insight into what may roll out next year. Next week, we'll be talking with Congressman Mark Molinaro, representing Congressional District number 19. He explains that there is a lot to be done in the new year that require both parties to work together.
There is the capacity to achieve great things for America if we have the will to do so, but that requires both sides. I mean, the president can't simply ignore a problem if we truly want to get to a solution, and the Senate's got to act. So we just need to put aside these differences, negotiate, and get to some common sense solutions.
For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray in Albany. We'll see you right here next week. And don't forget, you can catch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of our show on 10 TV stations across the great state of New York.